Hey guys, Mike here with Delta. Today I'm going to show you how to install Delta's pop-up drain assembly. Now, a couple of things to know before we dig into the project. First, not all faucets come with drains, so be sure to check the box or the online product page to see if one will be included with your new faucet or if you need to buy one separately. Second, there are different kinds of drains. There's a push-pop drain where you simply push down on the stopper to close it and then push it down again to open it. There's also a pop-up drain which has a lift rod in the back of your faucet. Don't worry, we have videos for both. We just want to make sure you're watching the right one. So take a look at what you've got there for a quick double check. In this video, we're installing the pop-up drain with the lift rod. I know, it's a little confusing. Okay, moving on. Bathroom drains, they get clogged. While we wish it didn't happen, we all know it does. And if that's why you're here, to figure out how to clean or remove your drain, we will help you do that as well. So with all that said, let's get started. Now before we begin, there's a few tools you'll want to grab. The first is a set of large groove joint pliers, and we need large ones because we have a big nut that we're going to tighten up to hold everything to the sink. Also, some silicone, some plumber's tape, of course, some safety glasses, and also a flashlight. Now, today we'll be installing the metal version of the pop-up drain. The only difference between this and the plastic version is that there's an extra tail piece that we'll be applying a little bit of plumber's tape to before reinstalling it. If you have the plastic version, that's the only difference, so all the steps will be identical from there on out. I'm sure you'll be able to follow along. Now your drain's going to come pre-assembled out of the packaging, so our first step for installation is to do some disassembly. First is taking off that protective cover, then go ahead and pull the stopper out, set that to the side. I'm going to loosen up the top flange, move it from the sink drain body, set that down. Next, I want to take this locking nut, I'm going to loosen it down the drain body as far as I can get it. I'm just spinning this down the shank here. And I also want to move this gasket down the threads, gives a little more room to work. All right, next, I'm going to take out my pivot rod nut. And I want to point out that inside the pivot rod hole, there's two little pieces here. There's a rubber gasket and a plastic seat. I like to try to keep them in there during installation. Sometimes they want to fall out, so just keep an eye on those two to make sure that they're staying in there as you continue installing your drain. Now, this next step is specific only to the metal drain, so if you have the plastic drain, feel free to skip ahead. The metal drain has a separate tail piece that unscrews. So I'm going to go ahead and unscrew that metal tail piece. Now I want to apply a little bit of plumber's tape to the threads at the top of the tail piece. Pull out my plumber's tape. I'm going to wrap it around the threads on the tail piece, making sure I get good full coverage on it. And I like wrapping this in the clockwise direction because that's the way we're going to thread it back into the sink body, and we'll be sure to tighten up that tape. All right, that looks pretty good. Again, grab my sink body and then thread my tail piece. All right, that feels good and snug. I'll set that aside. Next, I'm going to take my flange. I'm going to apply a bead of silicone to the underside of the flange. So, grab my silicone here. And it's okay to have a nice thick bead of silicone on this because it's going to all compress to form a good tight seal. All right, set that off to the side. All right, now I'm going to set my flange down into my sink, bring my sink body up from the bottom, and screw them together. Now I'm going to connect my flange to my drain body through the sink, and I'm going to bring my drain body up from the bottom and my flange down from the top. And point of note here is I'm keeping my flange above the sink because I don't want that silicone coming in contact with the sink just yet. I'm going to wait until I'm tightening everything down for the final time. So I'm holding it with my hand above the deck of the sink as I thread in the drain body from the bottom. And that will bottom out before anything gets tight. Now I'm going to make sure that my pivot hole is facing directly to the back of the cabinet or directly at the faucet before I let the flange come down in contact with the sink. All right, now moving underneath, I'm gonna push my gasket, my washer, up tight to the bottom of the sink, and and spin my lock nut off the drain body. All right, then I'm gonna use my groove joint pliers to make the last couple turns to tighten everything up. Again, I want to make sure this is good and tight because this will help create a good watertight seal from the bottom of the sink as we compress that gasket up. All right, that feels good and tight. Now the last thing I want to do is check to see if any silicone pressed out inside the sink while I was tightening up everything underneath. Make sure I've cleaned it all up, and we'll be ready to move on. Now that we have our stopper dropped into our drain, our next step is to connect our pivot rod. To do this, you'll notice the pivot rod has a plastic side and a metal side. The plastic side is going to go into the drain, contacting that stopper. So I want to make sure I take my pivot rod nut, feed it over the back, metal side of the pivot rod, making sure the threads are facing the plastic part. Now as I bring this up, I'm also going to check my pivot rod hole to make sure I still have that rubber gasket and that plastic seat in the right position. Then I'm going to insert the rod from the back and hand tighten the nut onto the drain body. And as I do this, important note is we don't need to over tighten this. We just want it to be snug enough that it keeps the rod in place. So you can see that it still moves up and down, but doesn't fall at all. I can keep it up, keep it down, perfect. All right, now with that in the down position, our next step is to connect the rod to the lift rod. So I'm gonna use my metal strap here. You'll see it has a locking screw on the top of it. I want to make sure this locking screw is loosened up enough that I can insert it easily onto my lift rod. I'm going to insert my lift rod through these two holes on the top by the screw. Just feed it up on there. All right, perfect. Then I'm going to connect the strap to my pivot rod. Now it doesn't really matter what hole you choose on this, you just want enough that you're not going to contact any of your plumbing, and also have enough so when you lift it up and down, you can adjust it a little bit if you need to. To lock it onto the rod, I'm using my lock clip. I insert one side of the clip over the pivot rod, then through the strap hole, and then pinch it a little bit to get it to lock onto the pivot rod. And then you can see it's not going to fall off as it goes up and down. All right, so our final step is to make sure my pivot rod is in the down position, as well as my lift rod up top is in the down position. When that looks good, I'm going to tighten up my lock screw. That's going to hold the strap onto the lift rod. Use a wrench just to give it a good little tight because we don't want that to ever come loose. All right, that feels good. All right, that about does it. I'm going to check the operation of the lift rod from the top to make sure the stopper is going up and down correctly, finish up my plumbing, and I think we're about done. Next, we're going to drop our stopper into our drain. But before I do that, I want to talk through the stopper because there's two ways you can install this. The first is with the loop facing the back wall of your faucet. This means your pivot rod will actually go through this loop, still functions up and down, but it makes it so you can't pull the stopper out. Second way is you can actually turn this 90 degrees so it will sit on your pivot rod. Still goes up and down, but the advantage of this is you can pull it out for cleaning or if you're checking for a clog. For this installation, I'm going to turn it 90 degrees so I can remove it later. So I've got the stopper. I want to make sure my loop at the bottom is facing the edge of the sink, 90 degrees away from the wall. Let's go ahead and drop that right down in. All right, perfect. Next, I'm going to check the functionality just to make sure that as I lift up and down the lift rod, the stopper moves up and down the bottom of the drain. Everything looks good there as well. Now before I put any water in here, I'm going to wait for about 24 hours or whatever the manufacturer specifies on the silicone just to make sure everything's nice and cured up. And that's it. Next I'll show you how to clean your drain. To clean your drain, all you have to do is lift your stopper out, and here I'm going to check for any buildup along the rubber gasket or along the stopper body. Also, be sure to take a quick peek down the middle of your drain to see if anything's hung up on your pivot rod a couple inches down. Also, you'll notice my stopper came easily out. If yours doesn't pull right out, it may still be connected to your pivot rod. If you need to remove your pivot rod, that's part of the uninstall of the drain, which I'm going to show you how to do right now. Now the first step of uninstalling our drain is going to be to remove our pivot rod. To do that, I'm going to squeeze my retaining clip and pull that off the end. Make sure my strap has come loose with my pivot rod, and then loosen up the lock nut on the strap to release it from the lift rod. All right, with that loose, I can pull my strap off and set that aside. Next, I'm gonna loosen my pivot rod nut. It should just come off with a little bit of hand pressure off the back. And then that releases my pivot rod. Now, I'm also gonna remove some of this existing plumbing to get full access to the drain itself. I have a bucket here because there could be a little bit of water left in this P-trap, so as I loosen these up, you might have a little bit of splashing. Now that I've got full access to the drain, my next step is going to be to loosen the large nut holding the drain body to the bottom of the sink. Use my groove joint pliers. Give it a couple turns until it loosens up. I should be able to use my hand to take it the rest of the way down. All right, you'll notice that gasket probably stays up there, so pull down on that gasket to give yourself a little bit more leeway to work on. Now that I've pushed the gasket down, I have a little more room to work with. I can grab the bottom of my drain body and kind of give it a little bit of a wiggle to break off any silicone that may be cured up above. I also want to grab my flange, with my fingers up above, and give a slight push up, and then simply unscrew the sink body from the flange. It'll drop right out like that. And that's it for under the cabinet. Now we're ready to move up top. All right. And our last step is just to pull out our flange and our stopper, set those to the side, and I'll also want to clean up any residue that may be left on the sink, and that's it, you're done. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to Delta Customer Service. They have a whole team that will be more than happy to help.